And we're live. Welcome to a special edition of our PCS Impact Q&A. I'm your host, MJ Boyce, the Director of Community Outreach here at PCS Grades. Boom! With me, as always, is the lovely Megan Harless, our resident PCS reform advocate, and oh, by the way, resident BA, censored for little ears, in your room because we love you. We've got a great show for you today, so I'm going to hit these housekeeping items because, you know, the important peeps at TRANSCOM, to include Mr. Marsh, our guest, have a very tight schedule because they are here to help you. They're just taking a minute out of our day to answer your questions. So ready for those housekeeping items? Here we go. All right, folks, we've got the answers. And if we don't have those answers, guess what? We know who does. And if we don't know either of those things, we're going to take your questions for action and get back to you with an answer. Speaking of questions, comments, concerns, shout outs, go ahead and leave those in the comment section below so that you can be addressed by Mr. Marsh himself. Yes, we are here to answer your questions about all things PPM today, especially in the crunch of peak PCS season. Next up, we bring the experts to you, like Mr. Marsh from Transportation Command, like the International Association of Movers, military spouse employment advocates, and military education experts. We bring them to you because they are the source. But sometimes you're going to end up in a situation that is specific to you and your military family. And in those instances, your two forever and always resources will be, number one, your local chain of command. Number two, your local transportation office. Those are the people who know you. Those are the people who are dealing with your stuff. Those are the people who could take your issues and further them for action. Of course, you always got PCS Grades at the helm, so go ahead and check us out at pcsgrades.com. But last and not least, and I'm modifying it, keep doing your part, people. Keep flattening that curve. We are doing our part and we are flattening that curve because you know what happens when we flatten that curve. We flatten Murphy with it. You hear us, Murphy? We are coming for you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Megan to introduce our special guest, Mr. Rick Marsh. Megan?
Hey, everybody, and welcome today. We're excited to have our guest today, Mr. Rick Marsh, on for his third visit from TRANSCOM to help share some of the important things that you need to know about PCSing this year. So with nothing else further, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rick Marsh, the Director of the Personal Property Program at TRANSCOM.
Hey, thanks, MJ. Megan, thanks for having me. Always good to be with you.
Awesome. Yes, and for those of you who want to know more about Mr. Marsh, we can throw his bio up in there. We'd happy to, or you can go back and watch the other ones he did with us. Trust me, you'll be informed and entertained. All right, we're going to hit this going down the rabbit hole. We're going to go into detail because a lot of families are having these issues this summer, because we're kind of post-ish COVID and, you know, some effects due to that whole pandemic, okay? And so there's a lot of different moving parts to this, but a lot of military families, to the tune of hundreds, have reached out and said they're having specific issues. Some of them are different, some of them are the same, and we're going to dive right in today. So I just want to tell you that Mr. Marsh and the TRANSCOM team were very happy when we requested to jump on. It was short fuse. They accepted the invite because they are ready to help you. All right, question number one. Okay, so we already know this year's a little, unique. So can you just give us, from like the transportation logistics side, can you give us a brief overview of what peak PCS season is kind of shaping up to be like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's challenging for sure. You know, from a volume perspective, pretty in line with historic averages. We saw some early peaks in April and May. As we look to August, there's already more shipments pushed out into August than we would normally see at this time in the year. We've got a new dashboard that we put on TRANSCOM's homepage just to give folks insights into volume, some performance indicators, on-time performance, customer satisfaction surveys. For those that are interested in it, you can go check that out. I think if we had this discussion 2 years ago, I think we would have spent a lot of time talking about quality. Right now, it's all about availability. I mean, just getting movers to show up is the issue. This year, like many sectors in the U.S., the moving and storage industry is facing some pretty significant labor shortfalls, and that's translating into tighter than normal capacity, longer lead times to finalize bookings. And this is true, in the Defense Personal Property Program and in the commercial non-DoD market. So what does that mean for customers? I mean, there's a lot of frustration on the front end, trying to get a move scheduled, as you mentioned, hundreds of folks are having problems with moving companies keeping the appointments that they committed to. And then I know that as we get into July and into August, and the deliveries start being made, the labor constraints will cause some frustrations as folks, particularly for shipments that go into storage and transit, working to get those scheduled.
So we know this year we've had a lot of different issues from families, and so we just wanted to break down a few of those scenarios. And if you could just give some guidance on what families should do in these situations or what the right answer would be. So the first situation, a family has a TSP assigned, there's no local agents assigned currently, and then the shipment is turned back within a matter of days from their pickup date. What can a family do, or what should happen in this situation here?
Yeah, so a turn back shipment, that's what we call, as you mentioned, a shipment that was awarded to a moving company. They said, they could handle it. And then for whatever reason, they ended up turning it back to the government because they can't service the load. So to date, we've picked up about 160,000 shipments. The services have reported right at 160 of those turnbacks to us, which is slightly above where we were at this point in 2019. And so in the instance you described, customers should really make two phone calls. One is to the transportation office to start talking about options, right, to see if other TSPs are available. And then the second option, the second phone call is what Ms. Boyce mentioned earlier, was to the chain of command. To start laying the groundwork, at least register the demand signal that you may need help on those things that the transportation office can't help with. Whether it's relief on report dates, which I acknowledge is not appropriate for all assignments. If you're going to school, if you're taking command, that may not be an option. But looking for relief on report dates. If you live on an installation, looking for relief with the housing office, and then also other entitlements, right, that fall outside, PCS related entitlements that fall outside the transportation realm.
Okay, so riddle me this. The TSP is assigned, the local agent is assigned, and then the local agent cancels the day before packing begins.
So I still think those two phone calls, and I'll raise you one. So absolutely call your transportation office. They have relationships with the local agents. They shouldn't have to do this, but they spend a lot of time working on behalf of moving companies, trying to find another agent that might work with the moving company that was assigned to your shipment. So absolutely make sure your transportation office is involved. Put that same, make sure your chain of command is tracking, but then also call your moving company, right? I mean, any moving company worth their salt would be more than happy to describe to you what they're doing to make sure that your shipment will be picked up on schedule, and more than happy to walk you through what they'll do to make it right if things slip. So I think those are the three folks you would need to call.
Awesome. And just for the record, everyone, I just wanted to let you know we're seeing a lot of we're seeing some links. We're dropping some links for you so that you're able to understand and see kind of what that chain of event would look like, what that policy number is, the survey satisfaction results. But we're also looking and following your questions, and we will be asking them either during or towards the end. So please know your question will be answered at some point throughout.
So our next situation that we have is that a TSP is assigned, a local agent is assigned, everything is up a shipment. And we've heard of families remaining in their homes for some extra period of time with everything boxed up, other folks getting their stuff sent to a storage facility. What kind of options do families have when there's no driver available for their shipment?
Yeah, so I think, again, reach out to make those phone calls. You don't have to solve this alone, I guess, is the primary theme. What you mentioned, sending it to a local, having a TSP, having the local agent take it to a local storage facility, I think is a workable solution for some folks, particularly if just getting out of the house is their driving factor. If folks are comfortable, as you mentioned, camping out, if that works for them, I would absolutely contact the transportation office and the moving company about an inconvenience claim. And just making sure you were reimbursed. If all of your things are packed up and you had to get a few items to be able to live, you shouldn't have to come out of pocket for those. So again, transportation office, chain of command, and then leverage the demand on the transportation office to make sure that they're meeting their end of the bargain.
A quick follow-up to this question. We've seen where some families have also asked about, can they secure their own storage unit and move their boxed items to the storage unit and have it picked up from that storage unit at a later time? Is that storage unit something that they could get reimbursed in some form from the military?
Yeah, I think that's one of those things you'll have to work through on the transportation office. And I've seen some of the services handling that differently. So I would absolutely, but before you expend any funds, definitely talk to your transportation office or your service personal property lead for that scenario.
Okay, so, and I think I kind of know at least part of the answer on this one. The shipment submitted, okay, but no TSP has been assigned. At what point in time does a family need to start looking at Plan B, C, or double F?
Yeah, so I think it depends on your timeline, your movement timeline. So if you're talking to your counselor and you're considered a short fuse, they tell you're considered a short fuse shipment, which is where your pickup is within 10 days of request. I'd give it 2 or 3 days to let the installation office and the shipping office get it arranged. Again, for those short fuse shipments, you are not responsible for figuring that out. They will tell you if your shipment falls into that category. So I'd wait 2 or 3 days. All other ones, it takes about 10 days now to get a shipment through the installation processing office to the shipping office for approval, and then to a TSP to come back to you. We're seeing it's about a 10-day turnaround there. So if you haven't heard on 10 days for those non-short fuse shipments, I'd start making phone calls.
For sure. And just a little, a little follow up. So when you say 10 days, you mean 10 days from which point to which point? From
the time that you've requested your shipment to your requested pickup.
Gotcha.
So one of the things that we always discuss a lot on here is about the inconvenience claims, and usually on the back end when you get your stuff delivered and they're missing the RDD. But there is a piece of the inconvenience claim that is there for when a TSP fails to pick up by your agreed upon pickup date or turns back your shipment within so many days and it cannot be rebooked for the same pickup date. Can you just talk a little bit about that inconvenience claim on the front end? What can be included in that? Can I claim cleaning fees because I can't get my home cleaned before I clear it now? Can I claim additional days of rent within that?
Yeah, so there's some nuance here on the inconvenience claims, but for what you described, if it is a true turn back where it cannot be rebooked with another TSP on the timeline that you were originally given, as you described, the business rules are pretty wide open. Is rent envisioned? Absolutely, absolutely. On the cleaning fees, I think I could see supporting that in some instances. Does it make sense to clean your oven that has been cleaned in 3 years? No. But if you got jammed up and your timeline, you lost the day that you planned to be able to wipe down floors and wipe out the kitchen after it was packed up, I think that's absolutely reasonable, and we'd go to bat for that.
And so that pretty much answers Eva's question. Shout out, Eva, because we saw you. It's like it's sharing a mind here. That also answers her claim. It depends, right? But in an instance like you mentioned, extending.
Absolutely. That's why we wrote that rule that way specifically for turnbacks, where if a TSP commits to handling a shipment and then they don't, a customer shouldn't have to bear those costs.
No.
Want to jump in real quick and say, this rule change is a correlation to what we saw last year and the previous years of companies, TSPs delaying that pickup date, shifting it, and that there really wasn't a lot of recourse to it from the family side of things, that, we just ended up being there for an extra day or two, having to tell our landlords we couldn't clear, having to pay those extra days of prorated rent. We took that information, TRANSCOM, we talked about it and was able to get that business rule changed to where we can now be able to claim those additional days because it's not on us of our timeline shifting because the company couldn't pick up our things. So that's where we have issues and any of the families have issues. It's really important to fill out that customer service satisfaction survey on DPS and to let your issues be heard so that way we can be able to look at the issues and make the changes that are needed there.
No, Totally agree. On this point, the rules are written where moving companies are supposed to, when they get into these situations, initiate the discussion on inconvenience claims. Many do a really good job of that, right? Many don't. And so if you think you're owed one, bring it up, right? I guess you shouldn't have to, just being perfectly honest, right? The expectation is that moving companies will, they know the rules, they know when inconvenience claims are and are not required. So again, some do a really good job of being proactive and bringing it up. Others don't. If you think you're owed one, bring it up. Again, talk to use your chain of command, use your transportation office to highlight it.
No, and that definitely makes sense. Just to kind of follow up with that a little bit, it's very difficult. I think we discussed earlier, my 22-year-old daughter in the next 12 months will execute her first PCS. So it's very different. It's very difficult for her, and sometimes even myself, let's just be real, to determine what hand does what, when, where, and why. Okay. So it's very difficult. Like, no, military families should not be having to do X, Y, and Z. But many of them feel that they have to, and I'm sure that we'll go over this here shortly. But we have been getting questions, so I'm thinking in terms of, they shouldn't have to be, but they are, because it's it's a weird situation this year, right? But specifically, let's just, I guess it's a two-parter for families who are looking to move mid-July through August pertaining to this. What should they expect if they shouldn't be expected to, move on their own, PPM on their own or whatever, or wait or stay behind or whatnot? What should they do?
Yeah, so I'll get to that. But before, going back to those scenarios, Ms. Harless, you asked, hey, what are the right answers? I do think it's worth highlighting what the wrong answers are, right? So all of them terrible spots to put families in. To your point, the right answer can't be go out and spend your own money. The right answer can't be immediately assume that you have to do a PPM. It may end up that way, but don't, I wouldn't make that decision, again, without exhausting all of your options with chain of command, right? And again, I know it won't work for every assignment, but before you expend funds, decide to take on a PPM, if you don't want to, you exhaust every other option that there is. So moving for the July and August movers, what can you expect? I think there's a few things. So the first is that you should still expect good customer service, right? You should still expect timely communication from your moving company and from DoD offices. You should absolutely expect phone calls and emails to be returned in a timely manner. You should not have to. You shouldn't expect to guess, if or when a moving company is going to show up at your house. You should expect your home to be treated with respect. You should expect your belongings also to be treated with respect. All very modest, right? It's not. I know that we're not asking for a lot here. On the health protection protocols front, you can expect some very minor changes to mask guidelines. So late last month, the department issued a revised force health protection guidelines. So now the rule is, hey, indoors, everybody still has to wear a mask. We're not changing that. But the new rule, which will get published this week from our office, is that we'll no longer require fully vaccinated personnel to wear a mask outdoors. If you're not fully vaccinated, the expectation is that you do wear a mask. And just like on the DoD guidelines, you should be prepared. If you're fully vaccinated and not wearing a mask, you should be prepared to show proof of vaccination.
That makes sense. And so you mean like when they're inside, they, no matter what, vaccinated or not, they'll still be wearing the mask?
Correct.
But outside, if they're vaccinated and they show proof, they're good to go. Correct.
And I mean, to their credit, I mean, moving companies have been working in some pretty brutal conditions, wearing masks. I mean, it's not an easy job in the best conditions. So we're happy to see this change. I know it'll offer some relief for movers. I mean, again, despite all the issues we're seeing, again, there's some great companies out there, some agents working some really long hours to take care of moves.
And I want to say that my young military kid, 19 years old, right? He has a job interview as a mover, right? A mover and packer coming up this week. I hope I didn't just jinx it. But I said, oh, this is my wheelhouse, brother. Let me tell you, here's what it's going to be hot, bro. You're going to wear a mask. Are you good to go with that? Well, yeah, I mean, they need us. Good answer.
Good. So, so broader expectations. So all of the capacity constraints we're talking about are still in place. Particularly in the U.S. I mean, most of the long lead times that we're seeing are on the domestic shipping offices. So if you're trying to schedule a move, with an origin in the U.S., most of the shipping offices are still booked through July. A few of them, Hawaii, Fort Bragg, San Antonio, Jacksonville, are booked through mid-August still. So you can expect some delays. With a few exceptions, the international shipping offices. So if you're moving from an international location, they're pretty standard, typical peak season timelines, 1 to 2 weeks before a booking can be made. And again, that's just information your local counselor can talk to you about. I always recommend counseling, whether it's your first move or your 15th, definitely take advantage of counseling. They'll be able to talk to you and give you insights into the constraints that they're seeing in their area.
Yeah, so I know today we already discussed a lot of issues. I know we're going to discuss some more when we get to the questions from our viewers today. But overall, big picture of the PCS process this year, with all the issues going on, the labor shortage, driver shortage, lumber issues between TRANSCOM and the moving industry, are there any solutions that are coming soon that can help ease the burden off of our military families?
Yeah, so I mean, DoD, we're paying competitive rates. We've made some adjustments to account for the things that you've mentioned to be able to continue to get at capacity. I know, some of the executives I've talked with in moving companies, they're increasing compensation to attract labor. But for the majority of the issues that we're talking about, I mean, the chain of command is going to be able to bring the real solutions, right? When it's instances where your broader relocation plans are at risk, right? Housing, report dates, that's just beyond the scope of your transportation office to be able to solve. And again, your chain of command is not going to be able to solve those global labor constraints, but they have access to resources that the transportation community just doesn't. Again, changing reporting timelines or making other entitlements available. And I'll steer clear of speaking on behalf of the service leaders on their on their personnel policies. But again, going back to this point on PPMs or spending money, I haven't talked to a single senior leader in any of the services who think either of those are acceptable, right? So I mean, I think they're the services, senior leaders are tracking this very closely. I've seen some great correspondence from some of the service senior leaders on this publicly. But again, I'm not sure. I don't think any of them think it's acceptable to force a customer to handle a PPM if they don't want to, or to start spending money, again, without exhausting all options first.
And I really love that you say exhaust all options first, because there is we have to own our move. We have to own our move. We have to be on it and utilize every possible resource, to include our local transportation office and our local chain of command, because they are indeed the two forever and always resources. And so I really appreciate you pushing that out. Is there a place that families can find kind of like an event scenario?
Not so much an event scenario like we just went through. We've got some content on move.mil. I think that's where you'll find most of the resources. I know some great information is out there in many of the Facebook groups that all of you host. But for official content, move.mil is the best resource.
Got you. And so I'm echoing. Oh my goodness. I'm going to unplug and I'm going to let Megan ask one of the questions. See, it wasn't the mute button this time. It was Murphy. Thanks, Murphy. Okay, so just really quick, there was one in particular. There's a couple in here. Let's see. Jennifer Barnhill. Are any policies being updated to help families who are dealing with out of the ordinary situations due to COVID?
So within personal property, No, not in particular that I can think of just based off the wording of that question, but more broadly, again, I know all of the things that the department put in place last year to respond, those are still largely available. So if you do have specific issues, I really can't decipher from the question, but I think the short answer is yes, right? I mean, if you have an issue and you need help, talk to your chain of command. The resources are available.
No, for sure. And then I think, this is kind of a good one. So Joette, and I'm sorry if it covers Mr. Marsh's face. I'm going to show her. Joette, I'm going to take it down though. I'm going to read it to Mr. Marsh. The question is, in the process of moving, my belongings have been picked up, put into storage. Then they were picked up again, taken to our next assignment and put back into storage. The delivery date's expected is, August 2nd, but that's 3 moves prior to getting to me. Why can't everything that is being put into storage be crated?
No, so that's a great question. So on the crating front, Ms. Harless mentioned lumber shortages earlier. I mean, as many of you have probably seen in the news, lumber prices for a while were at an all-time high. There were shortages. It was impacting the housing industry for sure, and it impacted the personal property program as well on crates and lift vans, which are primarily used for international moves. And so many TSPs, in previous summers, there's been a push to broaden. We call it Code 2 bookings, where their domestic moves are put into crates for additional protection. Prevent shipments from getting separated while moving in and out of storage, as you described. This year, with the shortages of lift vans, many moving companies, we call it blacking out. But many moving companies, wouldn't accept domestic Code 2 shipments just to make sure that these lift vans were available for international shipments.
Okay, so that kind of makes sense. Which, by the way, great job breaking that down for somebody who is otherwise deferring to Megan on the regular. Appreciate that, at least on this front. And then, California has been hard hit. This is one of those places where it's going to be even more difficult to find. So this is Ashley. Shout out Ashley. And I'll just read that. My movers canceled on us and we had to do a Diddy move, but to rent the truck cost more than the wait. It was extremely difficult to find a truck company that would let us leave the state of California with the truck. Would the cost be completely covered?
So I think in this scenario, I would go back to the transportation officer, to your service headquarters, and request something called actual cost reimbursement, where if you in a normal PPM, your reimbursement is tied to whatever we would have paid industry to handle your move. An actual cost reimbursement, they're used in pretty limited scenarios, but they exist for instances like this where you had to do a PPM. It wasn't your choice, and it's the reimbursement is tied to what you actually had to spend, even if that's above what you would have made under a typical PPM. So yeah, I would go back to your transportation office or your service and request an actual cost reimbursement memo.
And that's a really important thing because Megan spoke to that a tad. Megan, do you have anything to piggyback on?
No, I was just going to do a follow-on question about the PPM piece. Is that we know the current regulations at 100% of the government's respective cost, but this year there's a few additional expenses that you can be paid on top of that: the fuel surcharge, a bulky item pickup. Can you just briefly discuss some of those extra things that families can receive when doing a PPM this year?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed them. So this year the services, I think, did a really good job, working with family members to identify other things that we could roll into the cost to make it more reflective of what we would pay industry. So you mentioned bulky items, things like moving kayaks. If you have pickups from other locations, adding in fuel surcharges, those sorts of things that we would pay industry are also when applicable being applied to PPM vouchers to make sure that customers are properly compensated for a PPM.
And we have some, because it's kind of a gray area. And this one, Jennifer, again, shout out, girl, you're on fire. Do inconvenience claims cover families who are unable to move into housing because of lack of availability and are forced to stay in hotels? Probably longer term, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the discussion. There's some nuance here, right? So it depends on why this happened. If this is a one of those turnback scenarios, I feel very absolutely right. I mean that's what this was. That's what that was envisioned for. If it's the TSP missed pick up a day or two, it's a little more confusing. It's a little more. It depends on your scenario, and we can help you figure that out. I will say though that if you decide, we determine that no, in this case it's not appropriate or it's out of bounds, you still shouldn't have to pay for it out of pocket, right? I think that's where I would go and seek other entitlements to be able to cover your hotel stay.
Okay. And Brianna asked, I guess this is kind of similar. When does the inconvenience claim start? On RDD or the day after?
Yeah, day after delivery.
Day after delivery. All right, Brianna, shout out. Good question. Okay. This was actually, so Petra, Petra has a good question. She has a scenario that we've seen often. I'm going to throw it up there, and I'm going to go ahead and bet that we'll probably follow up with you offline a little bit. But Petra said, we were just told we have packers, totally have packers, but no movers, and that we have to find a truck. And I called everywhere, and every truck company's booked. And we pack out next Wednesday, and now we're scrambling. And so this fits into that scenario, one of those scenarios that we were doing earlier, right? So, when it comes to timing, it's very, very difficult. What would you suggest specifically for Petra to do?
Yeah, so I'm wondering who told her that they have packers, and I would be floored if a moving company told you had to find a truck. So I would want to know a little bit more about this scenario. It'd be highly inappropriate for a moving company to tell you I have packers for you, but you need to find a truck. So I think, Ms. Boyce, this is absolutely one to just get a little more details on to make sure we're answering it correctly.
Absolutely. Petra, if you wouldn't mind following this webinar, go ahead and come to the PCS Grades Facebook page and leave us a message with your email address so that we can get you in touch with the appropriate peeps. Speaking of which, Mr. Marsh, is there, we had an additional question, but everybody's wondering, in this instance and beyond, who should families reach out to if their local installation isn't able to help them?
Yeah, so each of the services have help desks that are available. And typically, again, these are typically for for transportation type problems. TRANSCOM has a 24-hour help desk for transportation and system type problems. If your question really is about broader relocation, whether it's report dates or lodging or those sorts of things, I would absolutely start chain of command. You can always contact us, so you can always contact your service headquarters, and they'll help you navigate it. But I agree with you. I mean, this is one of those kind of gaps in the DoD enterprise where we don't have relocation specialists, right? We have travel folks and we have transportation folks, but there is no good place for a holistic discussion on relocation.
And that's actually, you opened the door, friend. When it comes to that relocation, because that's kind of all encompassing, right? You've said before, people like ourselves, we need to speak up so that we can kind of say, hey, here are the gaps, we're living them, so that you and your friends at TRANSCOM or anybody that you can, kind of relay this to can look at that in the future and see this is a gap that needs to be filled and impacts all of these things. What can a family do to kind of help that along?
Yeah, no, I think that I think families have made that point pretty loud and clear, this year and the last couple of years. So I think for me, the demand signal is there. I don't have any immediate answers to it, but I know it's something that the department has to solve because I watch the folks in the transportation offices and the shipping offices who they're working so hard to align transportation, and they're getting we're asking them to do a lot of things that are they're not equipped to do, that are outside their scope. So I think this is absolutely something that the department has to take on.
Cool. We have some great engagement. Let me tell you, and it's not just problems. People are saying thank you. Like, Mr. Marsh, we understand that TRANSCOM is under the gun when it comes to they're taking care of you people. They're also here answering your questions, which is fantastical, and we just so much appreciate it. So we talked about those inconvenience claims, and sometimes it seems like it can be confusing. Some people kind of confuse the housing issues, the current inventory issues with the household goods issues. Can you just briefly explain what TRANSCOM handles in that realm?
Yeah, so it's all related, right? This goes back to that relocation piece. So there are some instances where we can't solve housing crises, we can't solve labor challenges, but we can work really closely with industry to try to make get access to as much capacity as possible. We can adjust rules to be as common sense as possible to help families. But again, there's some situations where if it comes to you've made it to destination now and you can't find housing, as much as I would love to be able to help with that, I can't. And that's not something I would put on industry to solve in an inconvenience claim. So we're very focused. My focus is on making sure we have access to quality capacity to meet the department's demand, and making sure that industry is held accountable for the moves that they do agree to handle. That's really my focus, and I know that's the focus of the service personal property offices as well.
No, for sure. And I mean more along the lines of, so if you have a housing issue, no matter what, your local transportation office and your local new chain of command, whether that's gaining or losing, being in close touch with them is key. But when we bring you on, you wouldn't necessarily be speaking to the housing aspect of things as much as you would to the HHG part of things.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Yes. That's where the installation housing offices come into play. Again, I know that the services are very focused on this. They're not. They absolutely recognize that housing, education, employment, and personal property. Right. That's all got to come together for successful relocation.
And I realize you are such a rock star to stay with us for this long, because I know you've got to get to another gig, but I just want to leave you with the opportunity. We do have some questions that probably require a little more in depth, and we're going to forward those along, and they will be answered, because Mr. Marsh and his team has agreed to, basically look at what you're asking and be able to provide you an appropriate answer based on your situation. And if further inquiry is required, we're keeping in touch, and they care. Look, I know it seems like they don't, but I need you all to know that they care, because that's why they're here. That's why he's here. Okay, so Mr. Marsh, please, anything for our military fams watching?
No, so I guess a few other points that we didn't cover earlier on. Going back to the wrong answer, what you should look out for. So we have seen, and maybe it was one of the questions that we didn't just get to yet, but we have heard reports of moving companies encouraging families to cancel their shipment, right? That they think it's going to be a turn. A moving company may think it's going to be a turn back, and so they're well, hey, cancel your shipment. That way, your transportation office can find someone else for you to handle the shipment. Don't do that. Highly unethical. The only reason I could think a moving company would do that is to avoid responsibility for inconvenience claims, right? So if you see that situation, don't cancel your shipment. Don't go into DPS and cancel your shipment. Talk to your chain of command. I would love to know about that. So again, just I guess that's one thing we didn't cover that I want to make clear. Definitely, if you see that, talk to your transportation office.
So that's who they should mention if a move is canceled, if they're approached by the TSP and says, go ahead and do a PPM. If they hear any of these things, they should go to their transportation office and report that, because what happens? What happens if they report them?
Yeah, so a few things. So again, I mean, this is I don't want to paint a negative picture of industry, because again, there's some great companies doing great things to handle
sure.
military families, but there are, we have seen some issues. We have seen some habitual offenders on turnbacks that get removed from the program.
Okay, that's the thing.
But more broadly, I guess don't hesitate to raise issues. Right? I mean, there's no shortage of things that will come up this year. There's no shortage of things that have come up this year. I think the message is you don't have to figure it out yourself. Again, I know we've said it a few times, but don't expect funds. Don't take on a PPM if you don't want to. Certainly seek help. And then, Ms. Harless, you mentioned it on the customer satisfaction survey. Take your surveys. They're important. They're helpful. They give us good insights into the program.
Yes, and I just want to throw some of this up there just for you, Mr. Marsh, and of course for the TRANSCOM community as well. Gina, shout out Gina, says thank you for your time. Angela, one of our regular viewers as well. Joette, who is a first timer from what I can see, but I'm very glad you joined us today. And I mean, honestly, there are so many more from the top to the bottom, but Brianna, you're absolutely welcome. And I'm sure that Mr. Marsh can say the exact same thing.
No, we're happy to do it. I mean, I know it's every year there's something. Last year was COVID. This year it's labor. I mean, there's always a challenge, and it only works if we're communicating. So no, thanks for having us. I mean, I know there's folks, literally hundreds of transportation offices around the globe that are trying to solve problems for people. So yeah, happy to do this, and grateful for your time as well.
And just for the record, what you see below Mr. Marsh's face right now is his email address, which he has totally given us permission to, by the way, put out to you in the event that you have exhausted all of your efforts through your local transportation office and your chain of command, and you're stuck and you just can't get the answer that you need, or if you have something, this is Mr. Marsh, and he gets it, and he is dealing with this on the daily. He is your problem solver, and that's why he's here. You don't know about the problems if nobody tells you about them, though, and that's why we're all here. But thank you, Mr. Marsh, for putting that up there. I mean, that is huge. Not a lot of people do that, but we appreciate it. And he has helped people in the past, y'all. I just need you to understand that. He follows up like gangbusters. So let me look. Okay, so any saved rounds, Megan?
No, not that I believe so for now.
All right, everybody, we're going to be keeping in close touch with Mr. Marsh and his team here. All of the questions that you asked today will be addressed in one way, shape, or form. Just give us a minute so we can forward those along. But thank you, Mr. Marsh, so much for being a Short Fuse guest. You are awesome. TRANSCOM is awesome. And until next time, Megan.
This too shall PCS.
Bye, everybody.